This is one of the things I'm
Welcome to the September 9th, 2013 Troy City Council meeting. Is Father Fadawa here this evening? Yeah, I'm going to reach out to Mayor Pro Tem Fleming to give the invocation. Please stand and remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance after the invocation. Mayor Pro Tem.
Let us pray. Our most gracious Heavenly Father, we acknowledge you as creator of the universe, Father, the heavens and earth and everything in it, Father. Every breath we have is a gift from you, Father. We know that you're not the author of confusion, that everything you do is perfect and in order. Tonight for this meeting, Lord, we just pray that things will be done in an orderly manner, Father, that the business that we're conducting will be done in a manner that's pleasing to you. These things we pray in your precious Son's name, Jesus. Amen. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Fleming. Troy City Council meeting is now called to order. The roll call, Ms. Bittner.
Mayor Slater?
Here.
Councilmember Campbell? Here. Mayor Pro Tem Fleming?
Here.
Councilmember Henderson?
Here.
Councilmember McGinnis?
Here.
Councilmember Pennington?
Here.
Councilmember Teets?
Here.
All present. Our first order of business is certificates of recognition and special presentations. C1 is the SEMCOG Sustainable Community Recognition Program, which will be introduced by Zaharish Saladin.
Yep.
And welcome this evening.
Well, good evening, Honorable Mayor and respected council members. Tonight's award is a follow-up in conclusion to our July 8th City Council meeting. We are privileged to have two representatives here today from SEMCOG giving us a sustainable community recognition. I would like to introduce Paul Tate, who is the Executive Director for SEMCOG, and also Susan Stefanski, who is Membership and External Affairs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mayor and members of the Council. This truly is an honor for us to be with you today. What we would like to award the City of Troy with is our Sustainable Communities Recognition Program. This is an honor that only a handful of communities in Southeast Michigan has received, and Susan will get into the details of the kinds of activities in which the City of Troy has been engaged that were used to grant you the award. But a couple of comments beforehand. One is a community does not get this award without strong elected leadership, elected official leadership, and strong staff work. It has to be that partnership, and the kinds of accomplishments that the City of Troy has made to get this award is truly to be commended. And I again personally want to commend both the council and staff for this award, and I'll have Susan come up and tell you about the kinds of things that went into this award, and then we'll have just a couple of comments afterward. Susan?
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul, and thank
Good
you for your
evening.
time this evening. Good evening. We're very pleased to be here to present you with this award today. This program was created to bring attention to local governments that have incorporated sustainable activities into their community management. The City of Troy is a leader in the region in achieving economic prosperity and efficiency while also helping to protect the environment and provide a high quality of life for its residents. Let me just cite a few of the 12 eligible program activities that the City of Troy has accomplished. First, developing a forward-thinking 3-year budget that provides the basis for the annual budget adopted in May. Using SEMCOG data to develop the city's master plan, which is the official guide for land use and development in Troy. The City of Troy uses benchmark data to compare government costs to other communities in the region and the country while implementing changes to meet those standards. And last, developing a trails and Pathways Master Plan to establish a network of recreational, multi-use trails that connect people to important destinations in a safer, more green, and accessible way for all users. This is just a handful of the 12 that we are recognizing you for. Your extraordinary efforts have earned you the highest level of recognition in the program, which is gold. And we commend your efforts to make your community more sustainable, and we're proud to present this award to you this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I would like to point out that, just for emphasis, that this is more than just environmental sustainability or fiscal sustainability, it's all of it. And again, I think the citizens of Troy should be very appreciative and honored by their leadership getting this award. One last comment before I bring the award up to you is there's another honor for Troy coming up on October 24th. SEMCOG's General Assembly, representing 159 local governments in Southeast Michigan, will be having our General Assembly here in Troy, and the mayor has graciously agreed to welcome peer elected officials from across the 7-county region to Troy. And again, I congratulate the city of Troy and wish you continued success.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
It's a great honor. I accept this obviously on behalf of the City Council and City Administration who initiated the program, and a special thanks, I think, to Stephanie Dilworth, who was the intern to the city manager at the time, and I think spearheaded this initiative on behalf of the city of Troy. So thank you very much. It's a great honor for us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next order of business is C2, which is a legislative update from Representative Martin Hawryluk, our state representative. Welcome, Martin. Before you begin, happy birthday.
Wow, that cat is out of the bag, apparently. I'll tell you what, they're more exciting when you're young, I'll tell you that much. I mean, young like a kid. At heart, perhaps. Well, good evening, Mayor Slater and members of the Troy City Council. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to address you this evening so that I can provide you with a legislative update. This summer was an opportunity for me to meet with residents, elected officials, business leaders, and other members of the community here in Troy and in Clawson. Additionally, it was an opportunity to participate in a work group of the School Bond Loan Fund. The purpose of this group was to study and evaluate the newly enacted legislation that passed the last legislative session, and to work on some solutions to the challenges facing school districts that participate in the fund. The purpose of the fund itself is to assist local school districts in the issuance of debt for their capital acquisitions, and also to smooth out the required mill levy for that debt issuance. A problem that was encountered by school districts, as well, of course, as municipalities, is a situation that happens when property values plummet over a number of years. Though not a common event, it is something that placed a significant strain on the system during the real estate and financial crises and created distortions that are placing a burden on local school districts because of the statutory constraints. Our work group has been evaluating changes to the statute that would be fair and equitable to districts and taxpayers across the state. It is possible and probable, actually, that some legislation will be introduced as a result of our work. As far as the legislative session is concerned, the House returned to session last Tuesday and the Senate on August 27th. As most of you are probably aware, the Senate and the House passed HB 4714 to expand Medicaid in the state of Michigan. The state is in the process of requesting some Medicaid waivers from the federal government as a result of this legislation, and expects to implement the expansion by the spring of next year. It is estimated that Michigan's Medicaid population will increase from 1.9 million people to 2.4 million people. A package of bills that I supported, Senate Bills 459 and 460, were introduced by Senator Pat Colbeck as an alternative to traditional Medicaid expansion, and it would have provided better and more affordable health care for lower-income populations. These bills were not voted on by the full Senate and never received a hearing in the House. It is my hope that the concepts in these bills will be further evaluated by our legislature in the years to come. Since I was last before you, the legislature passed and the governor signed into law HB 4743 to provide for local governments to further restrict and regulate the use of fireworks. This legislation was introduced because of a frustration by residents in Michigan, as well as a frustration of local governments with the unfettered use of fireworks in residential areas and the disruptiveness to which should be a serene environment and refuge to families. I applaud the City Council, the City Attorney, and the City Manager for proactively enacting a local ordinance that was allowed as a result of this new legislation. Nonetheless, I, and I'm sure many of you as well, have received a number of complaints from residents in Troy as well as in Clawson who believe that there is still too much commotion going on with respect to the use of fireworks. I have been requested to introduce and support legislation to further reduce the availability of dates and times that people have the absolute right to set off fireworks. Nothing is concrete, but I do ask for you to consider alternatives to the status quo and to advise me, either formally or informally, of your preference on how to proceed. Your thoughts on this matter are deeply appreciated. On another note, I would like to convey to you that my office has received over 4 dozen emails regarding group home density within certain neighborhoods in the city of Troy, as well as a lot of phone calls. These emails and phone calls have been both in support and in opposition to these homes, which are specifically for aged persons and persons with severe brain injuries. The homes are structured so as to provide a normalized and therapeutic home setting versus an institutionalized environment. I have conveyed the concerns to the City Attorney and to the City Manager that there is an issue out there in the community, and perhaps we need to have some constructive dialogue on this matter. I would like to convey to you my desire to work with the City Council regarding various issues of public policy. Should you see a need for the legislature to advance a bill or bills, please do not hesitate to send me a formal resolution or to simply contact me or my staff with a request to initiate or to support a bill. As a former member of the Troy City Council, I appreciate the efforts that all of you place into your positions and into your positions as citizen representatives, and I would like to support you however I can. Please consider me as a resource and do not hesitate to reach out to me. I also want to bring up the fact that I have 3 more office hours in the month of September, and I try to do at least 2 or 3 a month. On Monday the 23rd, which is 2 weeks from today, I will be at Panera Bread on Big Beaver in Rochester from 5 to 7 p.m. On Friday the 27th, I'll be at the Community Center in the main concourse from 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. And then on Monday, the 30th, 3 weeks from today, I will be at Clawson's Blair Memorial Library from 3:30 to 5. These dates are also available, or should be available, on my House website. Now, there's one other item that I will move to, but before I do that, and it's a special note of appreciation to one of our officers in the Troy Police Department. But before I do that, I wanted to know if there are any questions from the council.
Any questions from council?
Well, thank you very much, and it is, and I will call up, actually would ask the mayor to call up Chief Mayor, if that would be all right with you.
Absolutely. Chief Mayor?
The Troy Police Department has done a fine job of protecting the citizens of the city of Troy, and we read about a lot of crime in other communities nearby, and but we can all rest well at night because of the work that the department is doing. And in particular, MAD, during the summer, had an awards banquet for a number of law enforcement officers across the state who are doing their best to protect us from people who probably shouldn't be on the road at all. And Officer Melinda Weingart is one of those fine individuals. So I will not read the entire resolution, but the paragraphs that specifically refer to her work. Let it be known that in grateful recognition to Melinda Weigart's loyal service in protecting and defending the people of Troy, Melinda Weingart has been selected to receive the 2013 MAD Michigan Lifesavers Award. On behalf of everyone who has benefited directly from the work of this outstanding law enforcement officer and the countless others who reap the rewards of her sacrifices, we offer our congratulations and thanks on this well-deserved acknowledgement of excellence. The 2013 MAD Michigan Lifesavers Award demonstrates appreciation for all that Melinda Weingart has endured and contributed over the course of her career. It also signifies a level of professionalism best appreciated by Melinda Weingart's fellow officers, who also draw strength from the high standards she has set and shares with the entire Troy Police Department. In special tribute, therefore, this document is signed and dedicated to salute Melinda Weingart as this devoted law enforcement professional is honored with 2013 MAD Michigan Lifesavers Award. May Melinda Weingart and her family always enjoy the security she has devoted her life to providing for others. Thank you very much, Chief Nelson, for representing Melinda Weingart and accepting this. Excuse me, Chief Mayor. You know, I should know better than that. I've never done that before.
I'll make sure she gets it.
Thank you.
She couldn't be here because she works midnights, and we like her on midnight so she can arrest more drunk drivers. Thank you.
Congratulations to her. I'm not sure, but I believe she's won that award before, if I'm not mistaken, but maybe not. I think it might be her 9th time. She does a great job. Before we move on to C3, I just want to make an announcement. If you plan on speaking or plan to speak on an item that might be in the study session this evening, there is no public comment in the study session, so if you're going to speak on that, please sign up right now for public comment for items on the agenda, so you could speak shortly, because there is no public comment for the study item this evening. Our next item of business is C3, a proclamation for AT&T's Drive for Pledges Day, Don't Text and Drive campaign, and Community Affairs Director Cindy Stewart will present that this evening.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor and City Council. We were approached by AT&T, and as you know, texting has become something that everyone does. Everyone communicates by texting, but the one thing that we want to remind people is don't text and drive. Over 100,000 accidents are caused every year by people who are texting and driving. AT&T has started a Drive for Pledges Day, and if you go to itcanwait.com, you can take the pledge that you will not text and drive, so that we can have fewer accidents based on that. So we had all of our mayor and our city council all sign that they would and did take the pledge, and we invite all of our fellow citizens to do the same. Especially a lot of young people are out there driving, so we especially want them to know that put your phone in the glove compartment. That's what I had heard on the radio the other day for the teenagers. So there's that, and we can send a copy off to AT&T.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a great initiative. Our next order of business is C4, which is a proclamation for Patriot Week. And as we do every year, myself and members of City Council sign a proclamation declaring September 11th through the 17th, 2013 as Patriot Week. And we will have this on our webpage and available for anyone that might want to read it. I'm not going to read it this evening, but just keep in mind that 11th through the 17th is Patriot Week. And everyone on council certainly supports that. There are no carryover items and no public hearings, so our next order of business is public comment for items on the agenda. Our first speaker is Tom Kazubski, who will speak on J6 and hopefully give us a little bit of an update on the Troy Family Days. Good evening, Tom.
Hi, Mayor, members of council. On behalf of the over 300 volunteers, we would formally like to invite you to Troy Family Days this week as a group and as individuals to come and enjoy everything we do have to offer. And this is Cheryl Kashipsky, my wife, and she's the treasurer of Troy Family Days and very active as I am. And we're just here to let you know about a little bit of what we have to offer. And since that we have so much this year, I had to write it down. So just to fill you in, so in case something will hit the spot, come on down and see us. Also, the entire community is invited. Everything we raise at this event goes into a fund, and that fund supports nonprofits in the city through grants. So we do not keep the money. It goes right back into the community, so everything that comes in goes right back out. We have a giant midway with 35 rides. Arnold Amusement's back for his umpteenth year. We have 4 days of fantastic entertainment with bands and acts, and we even have on Saturday night between the fireworks, if we're approved tonight, between the fireworks we have a hypnotist coming in that gets a whole bunch of people up on stage and hypnotizes them, so you're all welcome to come up and if you dare. We have Animal Oasis, one of the better things from last year for the kids. It's a 1/4 acre of interactive zoo animals and reptiles and bird houses that the kids just really enjoy. We have, for the second year, it's called Baby and Me. It's for the people out there with the little child who need a place to go and relax and possibly feed the baby or change it. We have a special area just for them that they can go in and be comfortable. We have the popular bungee jump back from last year. We have a large children's area with pony rides and all kinds of things in there, or surprises and clowns and hula hoop contests and all kinds of things there. We have this year the fire department has graciously accepted our invitation to join us at Family Days, and they are doing 2 things. On Sunday it's a water battle, and I understand there's a couple of people that are going to be there, and they have a chili cook-off on Saturday, so please come and support them. They're raising money for the Michigan Burn Camp. Pancake breakfast by TYA on Sunday. We have a scarecrow contest. We have talent shows, water battles, and I know my time is up. I could speak for about 15 minutes, so.
But just want to let you know that parking is free. We have parking on-site and at Walsh with a shuttle over, and admission is $2 a person. Children under 4 are free.
Okay. Thank you. It's a great event. We'll see you there. A couple of us are going to get wet there, I know.
Yeah, I heard.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Next speaker is Larry Raniszewski to speak on P1. I hope I didn't butcher your name too bad there.
Great job. Great job. Raniszewski in English, Raniszewski in Polish.
Good evening.
Good evening. How are you?
Great. How are you?
Good. I think you've all had an opportunity to read first the letter and then the memo I sent to council on behalf of various Troy residents relating to this issue of cleaning of public walkways. I don't know if there's anything else the council needs or wants or would like to hear. I mean, I'm happy to just reiterate what's in here, but I don't know if that's the purpose of this. I mean, the bottom line is the residents feel that it shouldn't be residents' responsibility to maintain public walkways, but it's the city's. And a big problem, as I referenced in my memo, is the fact that even if this council were to disagree and say, no, we're going to leave the ordinance the way it is, or the responsibility the way it is, there's no guidance in this ordinance. You know, as I referenced, I spoke to Mr. Cushing and I both went to the department, spoke to 2 of your employees, asked them to give us guidance on when we'd be responsible, and they couldn't answer the question. They didn't know whether it's a dusting, 1 inch, 2 inch, whatever. So if they don't know, how are we supposed to know? And then the other issue I have is, once I clean it, then what happens? If the wind blows over it, am I going to get sued? Because I've taken the responsibility to clean that. We're on Waddles Road, we're on Coolidge Road, where the wind blows. So I could go out there and clean it, and a half an hour later the wind blows. Does that mean I got to go clean it again? I mean, there's just vagueness in this ordinance. And again, vagueness is one issue. Whose responsibility should it be? You know, I have the same issue, totally, it's not unrelated, but similar to what's going on right now with walkways now. One of our residents got a notice to clean 8 feet high. I don't know if the city's got Amazons moving in, but why do we need to have trees 8 feet high cleaned? We have poor residents out there standing on ladders trying to cut because they got a letter saying they're going to get fined if it's not clear. So you got to decide who's going to be responsible. The citizens don't think it should be them. Citizens thinks it should be the city, whether it's your private contractor or city employees. The very letter that was sent to myself and the other residents referenced this, a city contractor. So you must already have a city contractor. So if you have them, use them. And clean the streets or the sidewalks for the residents. As I mentioned, most of those residents have no access to that sidewalk. They would have to go through their own property, through their own bushes, through their own shrubs, or come all the way down Caliper and clean about 10 streets, or 10 sidewalks, then come up Martin, and then come across. So again.
Thank you. If you hang around for the study session this evening, I think a lot of your questions will be answered this evening.
Great. Thank you.
Jack Cushing, a resident, to also speak on P1.
Mr. Mayor, City Council.
Good evening.
I would just like to add to what Larry had to say. When I moved into Troy in 1974, the first resident in the Cove, well, Warbler Court, I noticed that the sidewalks back there were quite a distance from the house. And I asked whose responsibility that was, and the realtor told me it was the city's. I thought to myself, well, the realtor will tell me anything to sell a house. I came to City Hall, and unfortunately at that era, I didn't get in writing names, et cetera, et cetera. I trusted people who spoke to me, and I was told that it was the city's responsibility. I was also informed, which was reaffirmed by the city, that a green belt was required, and that most of the shrubbery, at least along Coolidge and along Waddles, was mandated by the city. And most of it was put in by the city. Some of the bushes there we put in before the city put its green belt in, and we stopped because we were told to. So the blockage is not due to us or our residents just planting what we wanted. It was a situation that was mandated by the city. In going around the city, looking here and there and so forth, I find many other places aside from where I live, which is the corner of Waddles and Coolidge, southeast corner. I find many other places where there is absolute blockage, and I don't know how those people are going to get through. One is the subdivision just west of Crooks on Waddles, where there are houses backing up to Waddles with a sidewalk, and the entrance to the subdivision is down Crooks by the cemetery. Now, I have investigated having the sidewalks commercially done, but I can't tell the people what the prerogatives are, just as Larry said. And to have that done, to meet with a dusting 1 inch or so forth, when you hire somebody to do your sidewalks in your driveway, 2 inches and they come around. To hire them for less than that, it's astronomical if they were to come around to try to meet that. And I can't meet that. I think it's the city's obligation that they have reneged on. And I think a lot of the residents there agree with me. Thank you for your time, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. That concludes the residents that have signed up to speak this evening. So our next order of business is City Council, City Administration response. Once again, I'll just indicate, I'm not saying that all of the solutions are going to be taken care of tonight, but we are going to address in a study session the issues that were brought up this evening. And if you want to stick around, we will have a discussion after a presentation by city staff. We'll have a discussion within the council about where we go from here. So please stick around, and we recognize that this is an issue that we need to address, and we're going to have a study session on that this evening. Does city staff want to say anything more than that at this point?
Mayor, thank you. Simply that we've had several internal meetings going through the letter, going through the ordinance with everyone from the city attorney's office to the planning department to code enforcement to my office. And as you said, it's a great starting point tonight and to get into the issue and then figure out where we go from there, because there are many issues that have been raised that have, obviously, we want to be responsive to.
We're doing that when it's still warm so that we can have this issue resolved by the time the first snow falls. That's our intent.
Well, in Michigan, it might be next week.
I understand.
I'm sorry.
Council, any other comments before we move forward? We'll see you at the study session. There are no postponed items, so our next order of business is regular business. There are no mayoral appointments this evening. I'm going to turn the podium over to Mayor Pro Tem Fleming for a couple of city council appointments this evening.
Thank you, Mayor. We have a couple of nominations. Resolved that Troy City Council hereby forwards the following nominated persons to serve on the boards and committees as indicated to the next regular city council meeting for action. First, on the Animal Control Appeal Board, we have Patrick Carolyn I'm nominating for a term expiring September the 30th, 2016. And next, on the Parks and Recreation Board, nominating Jeffrey Stewart for the term expiring 9/30/2016.
Support.
Moved by Mayor Pro Tem Fleming and supported by Councilwoman McGinnis that we nominate for the Animal Control Appeal Board Patrick Carolyn for the term to expire 9/30/2016, and Jeffrey Stewart for the Parks and Recreation Board for the term to expire 9/30/2016. Discussion? The vote, Ms. Bittner?
Mayor Slater?
Yes.
Councilmember Campbell?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Fleming?
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson?
Yes.
Councilmember McGinnis?
Yes.
Councilmember Pennington?
Yes.
Councilmember Teets?
Yes.
Motion passes.
More next time.
Pardon?
Have some more next time.
We will have some more for the next meeting. Next item of business is I3. There is no request for closed session this evening. So the next order of business is the consent agenda. Are there any members of council that wishes to pull an item? Councilman Teets?
Just pull J6.
J6, okay. Any other items? Somebody like to move the resolution without J6? Councilwoman McGinnis?
Resolved that Troy City Council hereby approves all items on the consent agenda as presented, with the exception of item J6, which shall be considered after the rest of the consent agenda.
Support.
Moved by Councilwoman McGinnis and supported by Mayor Pro Tem Fleming that we approve the consent agenda as presented with the exception of J6. Discussion? Do a vote, Ms. Bittner?
Councilmember Campbell?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Fleming?
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson?
Yes.
Councilmember McGinnis?
Yes.
Councilmember Pennington?
Yes.
Councilmember Teets?
Yes.
Mayor Slater?
Yes. Motion passes. Councilman Teets?
Nothing other than I'm part of this organization, so I'll have to,
Oh, you're part of it?
yeah, so I'll have to not pass on voting.
Do you have a vested financial interest in?
No, I'm part of North Woodward Foundation, the group organizing.
You just recuse it. That's all.
Okay.
So I'm going to pass on voting.
Understood.
Mayor?
Mayor Pro Tem Fleming.
Yes, I'll move, with that understanding, I'll move the resolution as printed, J6.
Second.
Moved by Mayor Pro Tem Fleming and supported by Councilman Campbell that we approve the item as printed. Discussion? The vote, Ms. Bittner.
Mayor Pro Tem Fleming?
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson?
Yes.
Councilmember McGinnis?
Yes.
Councilmember Pennington?
Yes.
Mayor Slater?
Yes.
Councilmember Campbell?
Yes.
Motion passes. Next item of business is memorandums and future council agenda items. There is an announcement for a public hearing. If there's any interest, it is posted and will be on the agenda for the next council meeting. Takes us to public comment for items not on the agenda. I assume Mr. Kazubski does not want to speak again, so I will move to Dan Brake, Troy resident.
Thank you.
Good evening.
An August 26, 2013 memo to Troy City Council written by the city manager makes it clear that Troy taxpayers have been illegally overcharged for years. This memo is available on the internet at troyrights.com. Current city law is your resolution dated November 9, 2009. It sets the general fund or your slush fund balance at 15% of the city's current general fund budget. The general fund budget for the current fiscal year is $53.9 million, so 15% is $8.1 million. The slush fund balance is guessed by the city to be $23.5 million. Let me repeat that. The target for the city's reserves is $8 million, and the actual amount is $23.5 million, for an in-the-bank right now surplus of over $15 million, and that's over and above a very reasonable 15% reserve. We've all been told repeatedly that our city services are cut way back because there is no money. The city manager's memo reads, quote, "Our reserve policy states that the city strives to maintain a minimum unassigned GF balance of 10 to 17% of the GF budget," end quote. The city manager put the word minimum in bold. In fact, your 2009 resolution, our city's law on this subject, you can read it at troyrights.com, makes no mention of the word minimum. It flatly states that the city will maintain the general fund balance between 13% and 17% of the general fund budget. This language means that the current city budget, with a general fund balance of 43.5%, is a violation of your own city law. Hopefully you will recognize this and instruct the city attorney to issue warrants for the arrest of those responsible for this crime. That's the 7 of you, of course. It's your budget. None of us could imagine bank robbers stealing $15 million and being allowed to spend the loot on their cronies' paychecks, perks, and pet projects. Yet that is exactly the crime that you are committing against Troy taxpayers. The situation is an outrage. The excess reserve of over $15 million works out to nearly one-half of all the city's property tax collections for 1 year, summer and winter. Your only moral solution is to order the refund of that $15 million pro rata to taxpayers who are not in arrears immediately. Do Troy's residents have to suffer the nationwide embarrassment of again having our Attorney General drag our city, crying and pouting, back into court to have this law enforced? Thank you.
Next speaker is James Savage, Troy resident.
Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, City Council. I don't have time to read all this article, so I'm going to quote a little from it. And that is from the Troy Gazette, September the 2nd, regarding outsourcing prosecution services discussed at the last study session. And it reads, after the city got the ICMA study a couple of years ago in 2011, it said that perhaps the prosecution services could be outsourced. It goes on to say that study was undertaken under the former manager, John Zerlag, and it was found that this wasn't a good idea. That's the end of quote. Well, that ICMA study that was not a good idea cost the taxpayers $100,000. And that wasn't the only bad idea that originated with Mr. Zerlag. $100,000 for the Big Beaver study, $2 million intersection, a $50,000 future study, the convention center, and the list of failed projects attributed to Mr. Zerlag goes on and on. Every project that was planned immediately entailed costly consultants and studies. And let's not forget that Mr. Zerlag was in the consulting business. But previous councils approved his plans, and he was never held accountable until Mayor Daniels criticized his performance. And she was condemned for it. But history has proven her right. I was opposed to outsourcing the building department, and I would be opposed to outsourcing our law department. I believe outsourcing and privatizing has its place, as in the city of Detroit and some other cities. But in Troy, as long as we have a council that will watch the purse strings and not be afraid to hold all its staff members accountable, I think our future should be fine. Thank you.
Next speaker is Nicholas Shericero, Troy resident. Good evening.
Good evening, everyone. Huge, huge surplus. Again, what is it for? What are we going to do with it? I'm deafened by council's reaction. Not one suggestion, and you've known about this since April. May I suggest the following? Eliminate the temporary millage for the library, which was never needed now that we know what's going on, and open the library on the 7th day. The above will allow a reduction in surplus of about $3.5 million per year over the next 3 years. That's about $10 million reduction in that huge surplus. If the taxable value of the property is stagnant, then we have a significant reduction. My guess is that the taxable value will increase significantly, and we will need to review this again in the future. Another method may be for the city assessor to slow the increase of taxable value for property. Something has to be done, folks. It's up to you to do it. I know one thing. If you leave money in the hands of politicians, you're going to spend it. We don't need that here in Troy. Start thinking. Give it some thought. Oh, by the way, I have one other request. All of you have microphones. Please use them. It's awful hard hearing in the back. Thank you.
Next speaker is Richard Peters, Troy resident.
Evening, Council, Mayor, folks in Troy. I'm just going to be pretty quick tonight. I just want to talk about Syria a little bit. Hopefully that the evidence will be allowed to be submitted to the General Assembly for discussion before any evidence is taken, and that way we may appear as I hate to use the phrase Zimmerman, but or the word, acting the appearance thereof. Also, Troy Days. I hope that it's at 10 o'clock, you know, and that, it seemed like it, I don't know if the other fellow mentioned that, but it seemed like there was a little bit noisy. I'm not too far from there, and it seemed like past 10 o'clock they were kind of going, and for me, that seemed like a little bit of a long time. Also, discussions on the budget tonight from these fellows. I would hope that the governments in general, not only Troy, but as a government, look as a living, breathing organism that responds to its citizens, not some kind of calculating machine that pegs everything on a number, thus affecting or parses everything as a digit. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. That concludes the residents that have signed up to speak this evening. Our next order of business will be council comments. Any comments this evening from council? Councilwoman McGinnis?
I was asked by some group leaders, a couple of members that founded the USA Melting Pot Club, to deliver a message about a project that they have coming up this week on Thursday, September 12th from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. at Grace Centers of Hope. They're going to be doing painting and yard work on Seneca Street in Pontiac. All of the club members will be helping Grace Centers take residents from homelessness to home ownership. They wanted to make sure that this information was available to the public for anyone that's interested in participating in this community service event. For more information, you can visit the club website, which is usameltingpot.org, or you can contact WILO at 248-978-7904 to make arrangements to join the group.
Thank you. Any other comments? Mayor Pro Tem Fleming?
Yes, Mayor. Recently, the city of Troy changed the remittance address on the water bills. There was a little yellow slip that was mailed out, I think, to all the residents. Most people got that and mailed the bill in to the correct address. There was an unintended consequence, though, I believe, that was brought to my attention. I received a phone call, or a couple of phone calls, and email from residents regarding this issue. Specifically, I believe the problem occurred when people had online payments, and the bank was making the payment for them. The water bills were sent to the incorrect address, delaying the receipt, and they received a penalty, notice of penalty on their bill. Now, I've had this discussion with the city manager, and I think he's had discussions with Mr. Darling, our financial services director, but just so the public's aware, I'd like the city manager to address this and explain what the city's plans are to the problem.
Mayor Pro Tem, thank you, and hopefully you can hear me back there, Mr. Chericero, because it is an important issue, and it is something that the city undertook, which was a major, major project that Mr. Darling was involved in with his staff. That's one of those internal projects that you may not know about, but takes a lot of staff time and working through. And as you mentioned, the problem has just surfaced to light, and Mr. Darling's aware of it, has met with staff, and I'll let him comment just a little bit further on what they're doing, but they are looking into it to see what in fact can be done.
Thank you. Yes, we are aware of it, and we are working on it. Again, just a quick summary, it's been a long implementation process, as you can imagine, that affects basically every resident and business that we have in the city where they remit their payments. The project really started the implementation part in January of this year and really kind of went in effect in May. So we're kind of coming through that cycle now of where our old bank was sending payments to us, and so we could still credit the resident's payment on time when it was received by the bank. Now that we're further through the process, some of those, especially online banking, may be rejected back to the customer. Clearly, we've done plenty of things to try and notify our residents with that, but there are a few that are trickling through, and we are aware of those, and we're going to work with those residents and businesses on that. Clearly, we're not in the penalty or in interest business. We're just looking for compliance, and we think we can work with each individual with that. okay? But this also gives me an opportunity, though, to thank all of our residents and commercials in the 35,000 tax bills and 27,000 water bills, where they have made the change with the city in remitting their payments to our new lock boxes. So I'd really like to take this opportunity to thank them for that. And again, the handfuls that it's kind of, again, a byproduct of any change that we make, that we're going to work with them, and we're aware of the situation.
Thank you. Thank you. Comments? Any other comments? I have a couple comments. First of all, we had discussed having the city manager review before November. So if I have consensus from the table, I'd like to propose the city manager review on October 21st, which will be the last meeting in October.
Meeting date?
Pardon?
Meeting date?
That's a meeting date. We would have a closed session after that meeting for city manager review. Mr. Kishnick, if that's a good date for you, I think we have consensus at the table.
That sounds great.
Okay. My second comment is I appreciate the letter that you sent to City Council from Standards & Poor's this afternoon, giving a very good reason why we have a AAA bond rating. And it certainly contradicts a couple of comments that were made this evening that I think should be published on the city webpage. And I would like to have it be part of the packet of reports at the next council meeting, if you could do that. I would certainly appreciate that. Councilman Teets.
To discuss the fund balance, we were going to have a study session about that. What was that, the 21st, or I just can't remember which
Well,
meeting
it's remember at the last meeting, I'd have to go back to the tape to figure out exactly what I said, for fear of bolding and minimum. I just don't want to. It's October, November is the time frame. We want time to put together. Remember, the first issue is what does that all look like, and you know, as Mr. Chair Searle and I met, it's a lot to go over, but it's a very good discussion. And then, as Mayor Slater continues to say, you know, what are some of the changes that were done, and let's reevaluate those. And Harris has just begun, as recently as today, of putting compiling that information together. So I haven't exactly established that date, Councilmember Teets, but it's meant to be in the fall, prior to the winter, when we start doing the budget.
Okay, great.
But we certainly intend to have that discussion.
That was my question.
Any other comments? Are there any comments about the reports that are on the agenda this evening? Okay, we will adjourn for a study session in the boardroom in 10 minutes. for our study session this evening. And just a couple comments before we start. I did have an opportunity to see the presentation earlier, and it's a great presentation, and I think it would behoove us to let them give the presentation and then wait till the end, because I asked some questions along the way that were answered along the way. So I think a lot of questions will get answered as they go through the presentation this evening. So I will turn the meeting over to City Manager Kishner.
So as I stated in the regular meeting, Mayor and City Council members, we've had several meetings on this, trying to drill down to what the issue is and trying to figure out, what other places do. And the staff has done an excellent job of keeping an open mind with the resident in mind and what's feasible, what's not. And as we've had many discussions, maybe some changes were made in the past that we need to revisit. And this may be what, there may be components of this where that's certainly a thing to come. So as we went through this, we tried to figure out, as we identify the problem, what are some of the solutions? And as you'll see going through the presentation, it's a very difficult issue to try to get your arms around solutions and what do they cost. But there's one thing that's true in Troy, Michigan, which is why it's called Pure Troy or Pure Michigan, is it's going to snow and the snow is going to melt. And then we're going to deal with that in the meantime. And how do we do that? And what's practical is where we've had many discussions. What's practical, what's reasonable, and what's practical. So as these guys go through the presentation, I think you'll find we've looked at many areas, but we're still open to what are some of the other areas we need to look at in terms of the next step. So this is the starting point. And remember, we talked about tall grass as well, because it kind of goes hand in hand, and then you heard from the speaker tonight, the vegetation heights as well. So this is something we're open to looking at and trying to figure out what's reasonable and practical. So with that, I'll turn it over to Paul Evans, who's done yeoman's work on this presentation, and his team.
Thank you. I'm the zoning and compliance officer for the city, and we see some nice pictures of what we'd like to think of when we think about snow and tall grass. And while I'd like to talk about that, I'm going to talk about that. So we're going to talk a little bit about right-of-way maintenance in this presentation. And in July of this year, City Council requested a study session to discuss right-of-way maintenance, including mowing and snow removal from public sidewalks. So what I'm going to talk about tonight are a few things. First, I'm going to talk about the code requirements and a little bit of history. I'm going to try to illustrate graphically and numerically the scope of some of those code requirements. I'm going to talk a little bit about public education efforts, talk about our code enforcement process in regards to right-of-way mowing and sidewalk snow removal. I've done a survey of some other neighboring communities and what are their regulations say regarding these two subjects. As many of you are aware, council is aware, we have received 2 citizen communications addressing specifically the issue of snow removal from the sidewalks. I'm going to talk a little bit about those communications, the concerns they raise in those communications, their suggested solutions, and then I'm going to drill down and talk about some cost scenarios. That's going to come back to the maps that I'll show you with the scope. So we're going to crunch some numbers just to get a general idea of if we're going to do certain things, what might be the cost to the city. And finally, I'll open it up for questions or comments. So the first thing I want to talk about is the city code. Chapter 34 regulates sidewalk snow removal, and I've quoted it there on the top, but what it says is that the occupant or owner of every property in Troy shall clear all snow and ice from sidewalks that are adjacent to the lot within the time herein required. The ordinance calls out some time frames that the owner or occupant has to remove the snow and ice from the sidewalks. And the ordinance goes on to say if the party does not clear it, the city may do so and invoice the property for that service. Now the history, except for some very minor grammatical changes, this code has been the same since 1966. I didn't research any further back than that, but it's been very consistent throughout the decades. Now the Roadway Maintenance Code, Chapter 82, regulates a related subject, right-of-way mowing. We define tall weeds and grass as anything over 10 inches tall. That ordinance says that the owner, occupant, or any person having control of any premises, and that's a key word because premises is what defines the area that we're talking about geographically, they're required to cut anything that's over 10 inches. Now, the definition of premise talks about that's a piece of land. It does include an easement or a public way, and includes the right-of-way that are owned by the city or the Road Commission of Oakland County. So it's very clear that the right-of-way is considered a premise, and the ordinance says that the owner or any person having control of the premises is required to cut the grass, and that includes the right-of-way adjacent to their parcels. Now, in 2010, that right-of-way component of the definition of premise was added. Previously, there's no requirement for property owners to mow the right-of-way. Now, some council members may recall that during that time, in 2009, when the ordinance was actually passed to become effective in 2010, the city was going through cost cutting in all areas. There was staff reduction, there were service reductions, that included the DPW, which did at the time maintain some of the public right-of-ways. So in order to make clear the reduction or elimination of service and enforceable, the ordinance was changed to define premise in that manner, effective in 2010. Now, what's the scope of all this? This map here, everything in blue you see, shows all the 526 miles of sidewalk within the city. Now, the city contains over 29,000 parcels, and over 3,400 of those abut main roads. I'm going to talk about the ones that abut main roads a little later in the cost scenarios. But just to further illustrate, if we drill down even further, maybe a little more specific to the communications received from the people in the Caliper neighborhood, there's almost 142 miles of sidewalk adjacent to main roads. In this example, the orange parcels are adjacent to main roads. Now, drilling down a little further, about 700 of these parcels back up to major roads. So the backyard is adjacent to a major road, and this equates to about a little over 20 miles of sidewalks that are residential in nature adjacent to people's rear yards. The city's done some public education regarding these codes to inform residents, well, anyone really, of what the code says. A couple of the avenues that we use, it's going to be on the left, we've got the city webpage. That's the main page. City News is always there. And during the spring and fall, Cindy Stewart puts on in City News links and information in regards to the requirements to clear sidewalks and to cut the public right-of-way. We also do that in the Troy Today. In the fall version, we talk about clearing the sidewalks. And in the spring, we talk about the requirement for mowing grass. Now, some additional mailings, and this is a little more specific to the fact that the city used to actually remove snow from some private sidewalk, some public sidewalks adjacent to private property. And these sidewalks receive high pedestrian traffic, and many of them were near public schools. As I said before, earlier in this decade, the city had some cost cutting in all areas and staff reductions, including the DPW. The last time the city removed snow from this group of sidewalks was in 2010, 2011. Each time we did, the total cost was $23,000. So in the fall of 2011, we sent letters to over 1,500 residents advising them the city would no longer be handling snow removal on certain public sidewalks. The parcels you see here in orange are the parcels that receive these letters. And sidewalks adjacent to these parcels, the city would remove snow from just over 11 miles of sidewalks in these areas that receive heavy pedestrian traffic or close proximity to schools. This is a copy of the notice that we sent them. One thing we tried to do is explain why the city is doing this. A summary of what the ordinance said. We asked people, if you're going away for a long period of time, can you make arrangements to have it cleared while you're gone? And some contact information. Paul, did that include the Caliper neighborhood? No, it didn't. The Caliper neighborhood mark is right here. It did not include that. Next thing I'm going to talk about is the code enforcement process. We'll start with sidewalks, snow. For the first time an inspector observes noncompliance, there's verbal notification or an educational letter. Compliance dates are established with all contacts. Because if there's subsequent noncompliance, we do send a certified letter to the owner as required by city code. So anytime there is a verbal or letter written, we come up with a compliance date. What we'll do is we'll send one certified letter per snow season. So if we do send a certified letter in January, it applies for the whole season. What that letter says is that it talks about the ordinance requirements, and if you're not complying anytime after the certified letter compliance deadline, the city does have the option to come out and have that snow removed. And the city will bill adjacent property owners who receive that letter all costs for any removal. Now with mowing, it's a little different in that when the inspector first observes a violation, we immediately send a first-class letter to the property owner. The similarity is that there's one violation notice per season, so they're on notice the whole season that they have to cut and continue to cut. If there's a violation anytime after that expiration date, contractor will mow, and the city will bill adjacent property owner all costs in the same manner. Now, I've done a survey of other communities' regulations for both these subject matters. We looked at Clawson, Rochester Hills, Madison Heights, Sterling Heights, Southfield, and Farmington Hills. Now, regarding mowing, except for the city of Southfield, which does not require any properties to cut any right-of-way, all of the other cities do require property owners to cut rights-of-ways. There is a range of who's required to cut what. For example, Farmington Hills only requires commercial properties to cut their rights-of-way. Other communities might require rear yards to not be cut, or perhaps put that responsibility onto the jurisdiction who takes care of the road. Other communities say that the owner is required to cut all rights-of-way adjacent to their property. Now, I surveyed the same communities regarding snow, with the exception of Farmington Hills. All the communities have a code that requires the adjoining property owner to remove snow from adjacent sidewalks within 48 hours. Now, the difference there is some communities do not require the owners to remove snow from sidewalks on main roads or behind their property, such as Sterling Heights does. Troy and Clawson and Madison Heights do require the owners to remove all snow. Now I'd like to talk more specifically about the communications that were sent to City Council on January 17th of this year and September 4th of this year. And the focus of these communications was with snow, not tall grass. So everything I talk about now is going to talk about snow. And to illustrate the letter writer of the January 17th letter, this individual at 1640 Caliper lives on a property that is bounded by streets and public sidewalks on 3 sides. Furthermore, behind him in his backyard is a main street, West Waddles. Now, the September 4th memo was signed by a number of residents in the area, and I've outlined here all the residents in this area who back up to a main road. 1640 Caliper, the letter and memo writer is here. But these people all have backyards that abut main roads. Now, what I tried to do here is summarize their concerns, and I'll address a few of their concerns throughout the presentation. The first thing they were concerned about was that the city was requiring private persons to maintain public sidewalks, and that they believe it's an improper transfer of city responsibility. Attorney Bloom, might you have any comment regarding that?
Yes, I can just add that, that this is something that is very common in a lot of other types of municipal governments. As far as cities, the Home Rule Cities Act is the state statute that allows the city to require persons to maintain the sidewalks free of snow and ice. We, based on the allowance under the Home Rule Cities Act, we do have a charter provision, which is section 2.2R, that does say that that City Council does have the ability to require persons who live in the city to clear their sidewalks, and it kind of transferring that responsibility to them, and that's again 2.2R. And it says that that can be done by ordinance, which we have done in chapter 34.
Thank you. Another concern they brought up was that rear yard sidewalks adjacent to main roads were difficult to access. I had the inspectors go around the city and take some pictures of areas that might represent difficult access. In these two pictures here, we have someone's rear yard that's separated from the street by a privacy fence. So really, unless you have a gate or some way to get through, it's not uncommon to have this. Here's a third example here. Now, another example we saw was vegetation in proximity to the road. This is along Crooks Road. And we have two difficulties here. Number one, if someone's going to remove sidewalk snow here, they have to throw it over this wall. But number two, more commonly than just this wall, is when someone comes and takes care of the snow, who knows, when the road commissioner or whoever it might be is going to come by and redeposit snow and ice on that sidewalk. And that snow and ice is going to be a lot different character, probably, than what's been removed.
10 times heavier.
So, so you got word character. So you can see, especially in this situation, why that's going to pose some unique circumstances for property owners adjacent to a road like that. Now we have also some vegetation that may get in the way of people being able to access to get their snow removal equipment across the yard. A deep rear yard. This is one example of a deep rear yard. Many people, especially those on cul-de-sacs and courts, have pretty deep yards, a couple hundred feet sometimes from the house to the street. So to bring equipment or manpower through the yard could certainly present some difficulty. And some people also have thick vegetation they might have. Some of this vegetation might not have been there when they bought the house. Maybe they planted it, but now it's matured and it can get in the way quite effectively of getting through and maintain, especially if you're in the middle of a block. The only other option really might be is to go around to the corner and walk all the way down or get your equipment all the way down and get off the street. So that's number two. The third thing they mentioned was a cost to the private homeowners. I don't think there's any question that there's going to be a cost. We heard that tonight. Number four, they indicated the ordinance was not clear specifically regarding the amount of snow and ice that perhaps established the test for removal. And we'll come back right here. I pulled that excerpt we saw earlier from the snow ordinance back up here. And it talks about the requirement that all snow and ice needs to be removed from sidewalks. So reading that, staff and the inspectors, when posed with the question of what's the test, well, that's the answer we have to give, all snow and ice. That is what the ordinance says. Concern number 5, timeliness. Now, the code requires snow to be removed by residents either within 12 hours after snowfall or the next day. Now, in reality, we don't enforce it for at least 24 hours. But their concern is that they have to remove sidewalk snow before city crews actually clear other snow in the subdivision. And that's from streets. We have Kurt and Tim here from the DPW. Do you guys want to?
Yeah, there is a difference in maintenance between a street and a sidewalk. Sidewalks are designed for pedestrian traffic, where a street is designed for vehicle traffic. Although it's not a bad idea that they complement each other in their accumulations on when to perform the work, but there is a maintenance difference. We do not have a clear pavement policy in the streets in the wintertime.
And you don't have an ordinance as well that says, for example, clear all snow and ice?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. The sixth thing they mentioned was civil liability. They're concerned that perhaps civilly, if they failed to clear or didn't follow the code, that there could be a civil liability involved. Attorney Bloom, would you answer
Yes.
that?
I did do just some research on the case law, and the government, we have governmental immunity. And because of that, also the homeowners, because we have governmental immunity because we wouldn't know when it's natural accumulation. Again, it's pure Troy. You're expected to be able to walk, to know that there's going to be snow on the sidewalk. So because it's unexpected and because it's not a defect in the sidewalk, it's considered a safe condition. So because the government has immunity, the homeowners would not face any additional liability for not keeping it clear at all times. So there's compliance. They need to comply with what the ordinance is, because otherwise it's a municipal civil infraction. But as far as civil liability, that's really not a major concern.
Thank you. Going on, number 7, they mentioned in the communications that ordinance enforcement is unfair or inconsistent. I'd like to talk about that for just a moment. Now, to couch ordinance enforcement, we respond to complaints. And when it comes to snow complaints, they can range from people complaining about a single site to literally miles of sidewalks. I've had people call me and tell me I'm in the Oakland Park Towers. I have difficulty with my mobility. I need the sidewalks to be clear. I need you to do something about this. Well, sure. Where would you like us to go? Both sides of John R. between 14 Mile and Big Beaver. Well, we can do that. That's not a problem. Another anecdotally speaking, we have a bike rider that comes in during the winter and gives us a list of streets to do, and he expects us to follow up on these on a regular basis. And he'll come in and say, I've been to talk to you about these before. How come you haven't followed up? There's still snow there. Then another common concern is, well, there's children walking to school. I see kids struggling through the snow. What can I do? So these are the types of complaints that we have to deal with when we couch how, when, and where we're going to enforce the ordinance for not only the 526 miles total, but even just 141 miles of sidewalks along our main roads. So what I'm going to talk about is the history of ordinance enforcement with sidewalks. This past snow season, 2012-2013, the inspectors contacted 411 representatives of private property to educate and inform them about the city code. The city code, as we said, does allow the city to remove the snow if it's not removed. Out of those contacts, we had no city abatements. And the snowfall for that year was about 48 inches. And I bring up the snowfall because in reviewing these numbers for the season before, we only had 16 property contacts. So on the face of it, might appear inconsistent or unfair. No abatements in that season as well, but that was the season where we had only 15 inches of snow. We had fruit trees blooming in February. It was very warm, so it was atypical. The season before that, we had 281 property contacts. There were actually 34 city abatements, and it was more typical of a snowfall, about 47 inches.
Before you change that slide, can you explain what those 34 abatements, what those were?
Those were simply properties that did not comply with the snow removal in time. Now, in preparing for these this presentation, I didn't drill down to exactly where the businesses, where the homes, where they backing the main roads or not. And we have the addresses of all the locations, and we would be able to break that down.
I'm just curious if they're homeowners or businesses.
I'm going to say they're certainly a combination, but beyond that, I didn't research that specifically for today's presentation.
Thank you.
Back to the list of concerns, and the final concern we mentioned in their communications with the sidewalk along Waddles Road in Coolidge receives limited use. So those are their only concerns. In the January 17th letter, they're very specific about 3 potential solutions they wanted the city to investigate that involved rescinding Chapter 34 of the city code, changing the code to allow grandfathering, or to have the city assume sidewalk snow removal along main roads. If we were to rescind the city code, this would mean the property owners abutting the street wouldn't be responsible for removing the snow and ice. This would include front yard sidewalks as well as the back. Now, if we were to change the code to allow grandfathering, anyone moving into the city or obtaining property after the grandfather date would have to be removed snow. Anyone before that wouldn't have to. I'm not sure the letter writer was aware, but the sidewalk code has been effective since at least 1966, so that would be the effective date that we'd be talking about if we were to think about a grandfathering clause. Admittedly, administering and enforcing a grandfathering provision would be challenging. It requires some research. And the third one was for the city to handle the snow removal instead of having the property owners remove it. Now, there's a few scenarios I'd like to go over quickly regarding the potential city costs that we could incur if indeed we remove snow from the public sidewalks. Their letter talks specifically about properties along main roads, and we said earlier there was about 142 miles of sidewalks adjacent to the main roads. That's everything in Orange County, all these parcels. Now, we have a current contractor that does the work for the city, so this is the price that the city pays for linear foot price for snowfall. And for a snowfall up to 6 inches to remove the snow from the almost 142 miles, the city would pay $90,000 per event. And if it was over 6 inches, that price would go up to almost $124,000 per event. This does not include administration costs. And to kind of frame where we're at in this past snow season, there are 31 snow events up to 6 inches and 2 snow events over 6 inches. And I'm going to show you some other scenarios based on the same formulas of the other maps that we looked at. This map here is all the people in the Calvert neighborhood that abut Waddles and Coolidge with the rear yards. That comes out to about 2,800 linear feet of sidewalk. So if the city were to take care of that, it would be almost $340 per event. At the up to 6 inches, over 6 inches, $464. Same as last slide. What I did too is I took all those properties and calculated the average rear sidewalk property line width. It's about 116, 117 feet. Per property, we're looking at between $14 and $19 per property, per event, depending on the snowfall height and, of course, how many times it snows. Now, we talked about that area that the city used to shovel, and now we don't. That's 11.23 miles. We did the same calculations. If we were to go back and do that, per event would be between $7,000 and $10,000. For those 11 miles, we go to the parcels, residential parcels that back up to the major roads, just over 20 miles. Same calculation, we're looking at almost $13,000 per event, and then almost $17,000, $18,000 per event for a higher snowfall. If we were to do everything, 526 miles of sidewalk in the city, how much would that cost? $334,000 for up to 6 inches, almost $460,000 for over 6 inches. So that gives us an idea of what it could cost based on the current contractor rates, which are competitively bid. Some additional potential modifications that could be done to perhaps address some of these issues here. The code could be changed to specify a snow event. And we could say, for example, a certain amount of inches before people have to remove snow and ice. Could we change the code to allow more time to remove snow and ice? Right now, it's not 24 hours, maybe 24 hours or another time is better. Can homeowners, groups of homeowners, homeowners associations, can they employ a private contractor to have this service done on a regular basis and also perhaps get better rates to lower the cost? The city has a home shore program where we do provide snow removal services for people who are eligible, and perhaps there's volunteer groups or individuals within the community that can assist further with certain scenarios that might come up. Finally, we could change the code also to not require certified mail. We do find that the response that we get, people are not happy with having to go to the post office and pick up certified letters. And if we could do it, it certainly allow code enforcement in the city to get information in people's hands sooner than later. Right-of-way maintenance. Well, every community at one time in certain areas might be here, but I think the issues right now are how do we get to here? So Pierre, Troy, Michigan, I'll open it up to any questions or comments.
Thank you, Paul. Who would like to start? Mayor Pro Tem Plummer.
Great job, Paul. I think your additional potential modifications offer some good suggestions. There was slide number 29, page 29 on our handout here. And I think we definitely need to go from saying no snow or ice to 4 inches. And another suggestion, rather than 24 hours, maybe 48 hours. Rather than 24 hours, give it more time because there's going to be blowing and drifting of snow after an event. And the 4 inches would be consistent with what we're doing on the roads, although Kurt shared with us that, there's a difference in walking and driving, but we just have to deal with it. We live in Michigan. We have to get used to that and deal with it. And sometimes giving 48 hours, that snow may melt, it may not be as big a deal. Look at your weather forecast, you can determine if you need to do anything. Another suggestion may be, if you don't have them there are some areas in Troy, and you pointed some out in your pictures, Paul, that's just not realistic for the homeowner to show, that retaining wall, for instance. So I think we make a couple of changes that are just common sense and logical, and then we identify some specific areas where we just cannot expect the homeowner to clear those sidewalks because it's a hazard or it's just not practical. And that retaining wall is one. That is a judgment call, but we just have to use our common sense. So I think we can identify some of those areas and actually let the residents in that area know that they don't have to clear the sidewalks. We don't expect them to. But in no way should we ever take on responsibility as a city to clear every sidewalk in the city. But where they back up to major roads, I think we have to do an evaluation and get a recommendation probably from the DPW. It's what they would suggest. It's not going to satisfy every homeowner, but it's a step in the right direction. And let's identify what's reasonable. There's not only retaining walls, but you showed a picture where it's several hundred feet to the back of the property line where the sidewalk starts. That's not realistic, I think, if you've got to go through trees or you have a fence or something. So we do drive-bys, we look at it, and we notify those residents, you don't need to do this, we're going to take care of it with the city contract. But then we have to put a dollar figure to it, That would be my suggestions. 4 inches, 48 hours, then identify specific hardship areas and notify the homeowners that are not expected to. This particular situation with this people here tonight, I don't know. I've not really studied that area. That may be one that would qualify part of it. I don't know, but I'm not saying specifically you would be in that category, but I think it's something we should look at and consider. And take responsibility for as a city. We can't do all of it. It's just not practical.
Well, yeah, I agree with most of that. I know there was a discussion that council had a little while ago of taking a look at doing subdivisions at 3 inches instead of 4 inches on the roadway, because 4 inches seems to be, in my humble opinion, a little much. To wait for it to get to 4 inches, 3 inches seems to work better. I've seen cars in my subdivision get stuck at 4 inches of snow. I would only, I guess my suggestion would be, whatever the depth of the street requirement is, whether it's 3 or 4 inches, when we get to that point, it should be the same on the sidewalk, in my opinion. I like the suggestion with the 48 hours, because I think snow can come and go in 2 days myself. I personally have sympathy, and the real reason I think that we got here together tonight was to take a look at things we've done in the past 2 or 3 years. The group of residents that were mostly affected are the ones, if you could bring the slide back up, where we changed the ordinance in 2010. Those are the ones I personally believe are the ones that were affected by our change. The ones on Caliper and the other streets in the city that were not part of that group have always had the enforcement that we've had since 1966. So it's hard for me to argue, because you can't do Caliper without doing everybody else in Troy, and that's just unrealistic. That's just unrealistic to expect the city to spend millions of dollars cleaning sidewalks that we've never done in the past. My concern is with the change that we made back in 2010, that we need to revisit that, in my opinion. And when we revisit that, Brian, that might be a great opportunity to take a look at what Mayor Pro Tem Fleming suggested about piggybacking some of the other sidewalks that were brought up by the residents in Caliper, that it is difficult to get to their sidewalk to do. It could be a safety issue, not only with doing the sidewalk. We saw a safety issue tonight. We certainly see a lot of safety issues with the mowing between the sidewalk and the road that I think we need to visit for the mowing part of it myself. So those are areas that I think we need to identify, so when we come back again, I think I saw a slide that said $123,000 is what the cost was to do that back in 2010. If that's not what I saw, if you could bring back some figures as to if we implemented the program back to what it was in 2010 for those residents that we used to clear the sidewalk, I thought it was it 23,000?
Yes, 23,000. I believe those were city forces, though. Correct,
That's when the city did it?
That's when the city did it. I think Paul did have some calculations. If we were to contract out the just under 12 miles of what we used to do in 10, 11, for the city contractor cost, contract price.
So part of what we're trying to do is take a look at things that we did back in 9, 10, revisiting that. I think it gives us a good opportunity to take a look at the suggestions from the residents on Caliper, to take a look at some of the other issues that they brought up. And I would think there's consensus with this council that we don't expect the residents, every time the snow blows on the sidewalk, to run out there and clear their sidewalk. We don't expect them. And everything that I've heard from city staff today is that we are not proactive going out there and finding sidewalks to send violations to. We are reacting to complaints. So when there's a complaint, then they're going and doing something about it. They're not driving around looking for sidewalks that need to be cleared. So we had one incident in 1 year and 34 in another year, but those, I have to assume, were from complaints.
And I think there's a big distinction between a resident complaining about something and then we're doing something about it, as opposed to driving around and just looking for sidewalks. So, I applaud the residents from Caliper bringing this forward to us, because this is something we were going to revisit, but there are some issues that you brought up that we certainly, I think, want to address. The time period, the inch, how much, it shouldn't be vague. The ordinance shouldn't be vague. You should know what the requirements are for every ordinance that we have. And that's my opinion. Councilman Henderson.
Just a key on your point about, not being proactive and going out and looking for sidewalks to site. That dynamic can change when you get a new neighbor or when somebody's winter behavioral patterns change. I'm going to walk my kid to school every day or whatnot. So, those things can trigger a phone call to City Hall. And, we've all gotten throughout the winter, somebody, walked past X house and the sidewalk's not cleared. So that, requires a phone call to City Hall and then a letter following. And then the other point is, as we're kind of discussing all this, it is a little unfair to expect somebody to plow at the end of your driveway when the plows come through and you get the big clump of snow. It's tough to get through that, but I can only imagine if I had 100 feet that aligns itself with a major road with 3 feet of ice and snow. Yeah. Trying to get down that is an extreme difficulty. So that's a difficulty, but I also don't think it's fair to put a 12-hour time frame on that when it might take us 24 hours or more to get to that, to just recover it. So, those two have to be tied together. The amount of time we allow somebody to clear that has to be after the trucks go through, in my opinion.
Councilman Keith.
Am I understanding correctly that the budget was cut by $23,000 to cut back the plowing? Is that correct?
Well, if I could just, having been there, and Mayor Pro Tem Fleming and Councilwoman McGinnis can certainly speak, but it had to do more with cutting personnel than anything. We were cutting positions, we were cutting staff, and there wasn't staffing to continue to do some of the programs that we were doing at the time. I think there was a dollar amount attached to it when it wasn't internal. Now we're farming that out, so there's a cost. We privatized that, basically, is what we did. And if we return to it, we would still be in the doing it privatized rather than hiring more people.
Right. So previously, it cost $23,000 to do it in-house. Okay.
I don't know that we could actually do that again because we don't have the personnel.
Right, but if we were to have a contractor do...
It would be whatever... Yeah, whatever that...
Well, the per event charge, yeah.
Whatever that per event charge, right.
Okay.
The only other thing, if the certified mail issue, I think, is old. That's the old way of doing things. And I don't think our residents need to have to go to the post office to...
I could understand why people would be very upset.
I
would be.
I think we should just,
decide.
quite honestly, if there's consensus here today, Brian, I think we should not do that anymore. I think we could stop that today.
We will implement the direction of council, I think, in order to make sure that happens.
And, as far as the 4 inches or 48 hours and so forth, I think one of the things that's frustrating with the ordinance as it's written is the 12-hour or 6 p.m. I think that's a great change. And then setting a depth that, whatever that number is, just for the sake of clarity, because when you get complaints, to be able to say we had 2 inches of snow, we didn't have 7 inches of snow, have that clarity. to answer complaints, because I think that would eliminate many of the complaints that are probably not founded in reality of what's actually on the sidewalk.
Yeah, when I heard that somebody gets on their bicycle and just starts driving around Troy,
Right.
that's not right. That's just not right. And I think we can nip that in the bud real quick by having a threshold of 3 inches or 4 inches, whatever the standard is that we choose. Sure.
The other question I had was, the residents that had the concerns on Caliper, but also other places, prior to 2011 or whenever the change in service happened, were there just never complaints that were sent on to them? Because clearly they felt like this was not their responsibility for 20 years, 25 years. And now we're saying, well, that's been the case the whole time. Were there complaints never given to them? I mean, if I'm sitting in that chair, I'd be going, yeah, right, this is de facto, it was taken care of by the city, because of the ordinances.
I can touch base on that, because I know that code enforcement only has been handling this for the last 3 years, and the engineering department handled it for a couple years before that. Originally, it was in the DPW, and you're actually correct. We got very few calls. That was very specific, and back in, I want to say 25 years ago, when Mike Culpepper and Don Spur were here, there was a list generated, and that was where these school routes came into effect, because you get snow out there and you get a couple hundred kids that would travel that in the morning or at night, where a lot of these locations, the rest of it, those students are bused. And so that's where that was generated from. Over the more recent years, there's been more activity with calls, because we do have people who have interest in bicycling in the wintertime. We have a lot more people who are out jogging in the wintertime and doing other activities that weren't as common 15 to 20 years ago.
If I could add to that too, we talk a little bit about public education. We find not only for snow and tall grass, but all of our codes, people become more educated, they're more attuned. I believe they have a tendency to call in more often when they have a clear idea of what things are regulated and how they're regulated. That's not with snow, but with everything. So it could be also an increased public awareness on top of what Tim's talking about with the additional outdoor activities.
But the point, Paul, is that whatever happened over in Caliper area was generated by a complaint.
I believe so, but I would have to double check. The inspector was not in today.
I can only tell you that.
Sir, please.
I'm sorry.
Councilman Henderson?
Just to be clear, if we make any changes, we're only talking about on the main roads, right?
Correct.
Not in front of your direct house.
Correct.
And can we make that change, differentiate between the back of your house and the front of your house, or side of your house?
It's going to involve some creative language, especially Mayor Pro Tem.
I mean, it used to be that way till 10.
Well, the ordinance, though, says all, and so we need to figure out a way to change that. And again, I'm trying to think about, if there's consensus to adopt Mayor Pro Tem Fleming's, suggestions about when there's a safety issue and, all those. We have to somehow draft language to make it clear that that's what the city is going to be doing. But we are up to that challenge, I'm sure.
Councilwoman McGinnis?
Well, after, listening to a few other council people speak, and I'm kind of probably following up with what's already been said, but it does seem like the issues that have been brought to light shine on the fact that there's definitely some vagueness. And I just think, I know that we were able to point out that there is language in there that says all snow and ice, but if you interpret that literally, which is about the only thing that we have to go on, it does give a citizen the impression that they would literally have to be sitting outside watching snowfall and scraping it off, which I think is not reasonable and it's not practical. So, I think there are kind of two extremes here that we're talking about. One is having the city take over plowing and shoveling every single city sidewalk, which I don't think is financially feasible for us to even consider. But then there's kind of the other extreme at this point, that we're giving the citizens the impression that the literal language is they've got a 12-hour window and they've got to get off all the snow and ice. And some people haven't, been doing it this way the entire time, so it's new to them. Or maybe they never received a complaint before, because we use that as a way to be a little bit more reactive than proactive. So there's a little bit of uncertainty there on when they might be called out for not following the ordinance. So I do think we need to clean it up a little bit. And I'm hopeful that, by cleaning up the language, that will alleviate some of the concerns, and maybe make someone that's coming to us at this point saying that they want us to take all the city sidewalks back, they could live with whatever the new terms are, as long as they're much more clear and they're much more reasonable, because I think the way that we're interpreting it right now is a little bit unreasonable. So I would definitely say that we need to do that. And if it comes at the same time of possibly having a discussion of going back to what we were doing in 2009, I think those things could be done together. But I think whether or not we make the decision to go back to what we did in 2009, after we look at it financially, we've got to clean up the language here. And I see, just looking back in comparison, I really appreciate that you took the time to look at the other municipalities. Not that we want to be a follower, but it shows us that they've all kind of taken this into consideration. They're doing what works best for their community. So I think there is a way for us to make it work, but I definitely think the language needs to be cleaned up.
The only other, we're just talking about snow, but if you can show this slide about the grass, in my humble opinion, 10 inches in a residential neighborhood is way too high as a standard for our city. I think 6 inches is a more realistic starting point, because from what I've heard, the complaint starts at 10 inches before the grass gets cut. It's actually 24 inches. And this here, nobody wants to live next door to that.
Well, it's not 10 inches either. That's like a foot and a half, almost 2 feet.
Well, it started at 10 inches, and before the city can actually enact the program that needs to be enacted to cut it, it's up to double that.
We do get calls, hey, the grass is tall, the inspectors sometimes have to tell and complain, and we've got to wait. We agree that it looks bad, it sticks out like a sore thumb in the neighborhood, we wouldn't want to live next to it, but we have to wait. Otherwise, we're going beyond what the ordinance calls for, requiring someone to do something that the ordinance doesn't yet require them to do.
I would just, Brian, when you bring this all back to us, if you could take a look at maybe getting that down to 6 inches, and at least letting us take a look at it.
I would be curious to know what other cities have as their standard.
Right.
Because if you bring that down to 6 inches, then you're gonna get phone calls at 4 inches if you forgot to mow on Saturday. I know, I wouldn't want to live next door. Oh, certainly, I wouldn't either, but,
I just think while we're looking at this, let's take a look and see what other communities are doing with their mowing, and see what recommendations from you folks about what you think would be a good starting point too, would be something that I would look for. And the only other suggestion I have is that I really would like to see us look at 3 inches in the subdivision as a standard, and if we could get some figures on that, what the cost would be if we reduced it from 4 inches to 3 inches. I know there's no science to that, but maybe, I just, 4 inches was the threshold last winter, and my neighbor, about 4 of them got stuck in the subdivision at 4 inches.
Just out of curiosity, who's responsible for these cattails that are about 16 feet tall in front of homes, in the gullies, along like John R. and DeQuinder?
Well, you mentioned 2 roads that are Oakland County roads.
So the homeowner's not responsible for that?
No.
There's a hesitation there.
No.
Okay.
I mean, there's a lot of homeowners that do go out and they'll trim them down, but the county will come out and cut them. But traditionally, early on in the season, all they do is come out and will mow to make it to reduce sight distance problems, where cars come up, can't see around a driveway or can't see around. And then once later in the season, as you've seen just in the last few weeks, they've come out and cut them down low and knocked them down. But the majority of everything you see out there is on Oakland County roads.
When we're seeing the data about the lawn mowing and so forth, it's very helpful to know how many complaints and how many times folks have gone out. But moreover, it would be interesting to know commercial versus residential. You know, whether it's a commercial site that needed to have their lawn maintenance or whatever done. Because oftentimes I see a lot of commercial sites that are just overgrown when the place is up for lease or something.
Mark, there are several lots within the city that we take care of because the homeowner knows that we will take care of those lots when it gets to a certain height.
Yes, that's true. In fact, there's somewhat of a reliance on...
There's a reliance on us
to maintain the
That's
property.
the problem when you set thresholds, that some people think it's more cost-effective, just put that on my tax bill and let the city take care of it. It becomes a city maintenance issue almost. I found, how many do we have?
Do you guys know?
I think I heard that figure today, and it was...
For vacant lots?
Yeah, how many? Didn't I hear something like...
Vacant commercial lots, we used to be over 100 lots that we used to maintain. We've got that number down considerably over the last year, and I think we're down to under 20 lots that are relying on the city to maintain.
We've tried to change behaviors by having it being portrayed as a service provided by the DPW to something that ordinance enforcement will get involved with if need be. And we've changed a lot of people's behaviors to just hire their own contractor and have them do it on a regular basis rather than rely on the city.
I think it's a good suggestion, though, to take a look at what Councilman Teets suggested about previous complaints, and somebody brought up how many of those 34 complaints were
34
residential abatements, what were they at? I think we'd like to know what that is, too. Mayor Pro Tem Fleming.
Mayor, we talked about the hardship with the snow. There may be some properties that also have hardship with mowing. We talked about the grades or the elevations and so forth, where the ordinance now says it's the resident's responsibility, but if we could, at the same time, we're looking at snow removal and exceptions where we could maybe, should be doing that as a city for obvious reasons. There may also be some properties, a few of them, where the city should be having a contract to do that versus subject the residents to an ordinance that they would have to mow an area that's really not safe or something. And I think there again, using some judgment.
A few years ago, we did establish a grade standard, either 1 or 4, 1 or 5, I can't remember which one it is, but nonetheless, I mean, we wouldn't expect our own crews to safely go in there. We can't expect the residents to go in there. So when we do enforce, if that area starts to slope down, once it hits that threshold, they don't have to do it, we don't require it to be done.
Is that specified anywhere?
Notify them, or?
Just, I might have some emails, it's not part of the code.
Okay.
It's just part of how we administer.
Ryan, did you want to summarize?
No, I don't want to summarize yet. I want to clarify back to Councilmember Teets. So I got kind of lost there, trying to get this. So you want to know about the code enforcement history for tall grass?
Yeah, before we start lowering the standard,
yes,
I'd be curious to know.
So if we said there's 542 enforcements in 10, 11, 7, 14, 11, 12, and 6, 17, and 12, 13, you would want to know that.
Residential, commercial.
Okay, so
break it down that way. Residential.
now you want to, so point 2, you want to know if it's broke, you want to break those enforcements from commercial and industrial,
I'm not trying to ruin somebody's week. I'm just looking for a general sense. I mean,
which is the residential versus
Yeah,
all others.
I think that's a reasonable question to ask. And so I think without spending, you know.
Well, first of all, I didn't think it was unreasonable. I just want to be clear.
Yeah.
So we have these numbers, and we need to break them down from residential to all else, basically, for that. What I didn't understand, was there anything else after that? That's
Otherwise, what type of complaints are you getting on mowing? And you're probably going to have to reach out to some experience from the guys, I think, and gals that, you know, I heard today that it starts at 10 inches, but by the time the problem is taken care of, it's 24 inches. So I'm trying to find a way so that it doesn't end up at 24 inches before the problem's resolved.
Yep, okay. Because we didn't give you that data, but we'll put it together, and now we can, based on the comment, we can put it together, drill down.
Well, I think if you have to start at 6, and when you actually take care of the problem, it's at 15, it seems like maybe
That's a time thing.
you know, it's a time thing or whatever.
So I'll do my best to summarize. My job's easy, Lori's job's a lot harder. But we're gonna change the requirement, eliminating certified mail. We're going to evaluate the snow depth for streets and sidewalks to be same, and looking at 3 inches on both. And that would be on sidewalks on major roads, right? And change the code to allow more time to remove that snow and ice to 48 hours on major roads. And then we would also look at exempting some areas of Troy from the ordinance because it's not feasible, practical, or it's a safety hazard. And then we'd evaluate properties that back up to major roads to determine what to do. So we actually, that's a little subset, if you will, to look at that. Then we would revisit the 2010 changes to determine what to do and look at the hazard areas and identify what the cost is to if it's a word, re-implement that policy that was changed. And then we'd also look at the grass component and changing it from, well, we look at other communities, number one. We look at the complaints and break them down by types, and then sort of try to get a feel if there's a general pattern of what types of complaints we're getting at what heights. And then check to see, after we did that, we'd check to see what we should possibly recommend changing from 10 inches to possibly 6 or some other number based on the data, the pattern, or the findings. And that's what I had as a summary.
I guess my basic idea is the 10 inches a problem right now? I mean, are we searching for a problem to solve?
I've heard from half a dozen residents that the problem has to get so bad in their neighbor. And most of them happened at foreclosure homes and things of that nature when we're going through a lot of foreclosures, that the city couldn't do anything. And then once the city could do something, the process took so long. Living next door to this, all it harbored environments.
This year?
Yes. Yes. So I think we owe it to our residents that they don't have to live next door to something like this. In my opinion, I wouldn't want to live next door. The only thing, Brian, if I could just, did you say you're only looking at doing 3 inches on sidewalks that abut main roads?
I did say that.
Is that what the council, you still want to leave that you have to clear off a very thin layer on the sidewalk in front of your house?
I would think you want that passable for a subdivision in front of your house.
Councilwoman McGinnis?
But the point was brought up that they are treating the road standard different from the sidewalk standard because instead of cars or trucks, you have people passing it. I don't know, I mean, if that's a safety issue, I'm having a hard time visualizing what 3 and 4 inches looks like, you know, I guess right now with no snow on the ground, but I would want to make sure that, you know, there's
some discussion here about somebody going out and taking care of 1 inch on their driveway, and then the snowplow coming through there and throwing 3 inches back up on the driveway after they, so I just don't want to clear. So we're just talking about main roads, changing the ordinance, we're changing something for the main roads to be 3 inches and keeping the rest the way it is.
My thought was, at least in front of your house, I would say you want that cleared so people can pass through, but at least extend the time so that you're not.
I'm talking about the inches issue, not the time.
Oh, we're talking 3 inches on everything, in 48 hours to get rid of it.
That's what I thought we were talking about, but that's not what, that's not what was said here, so.
That's why we try to summarize it.
Is this council looking at having the sidewalk in front of the house different than the sidewalk behind the house?
No,
On the main road?
I don't think so.
Okay.
But I think we just need to address the fact that
Well, I think
some,
Mr. Kishner thought that that's where it was.
Well, I heard the conversation to Attorney Bloom, are you gonna be able to write this so it's different? And so so that's where you have certain standards in the front and certain standards in difficult to get. But that's, okay, I've been wrong before. So if it's one standard and it's 3 inches on all sidewalks.
In 48 hours.
In 48 hours on all sidewalks, that makes it
I
easier.
wouldn't, I mean, most people would probably clear it.
I don't think it creates a hardship if you're plowing your driveway to zip down either side of your sidewalk. And to get rid of that, I think is a little less practical than, having to haul your snow blower 3 blocks to get it around the back of your house. I think there is a difference there.
If I may, the ordinance now says clear of snow and ice, all. And the only way to interpret that is you walk out there and you see snow on the front of your sidewalk, you're in violation of the ordinance.
Right.
That's not realistic. I don't care if it's in front of your house or behind your house or the side of your house. You gotta have some leadway and some common sense. And it's 3 inches or 4 inches, but you could probably do a better job in front of your house. But to say it's clear of snow and ice, which means every time the wind blows, you have to get out there and clear it off, or you're not.
Yeah, I mean, let's be realistic here. Most people are gonna maintain the front of their house the way they've always maintained it, but I think we're trying to get consistent here. And, I just thought that the consensus here was that we were changing it to 3 inches, and that's the standard that we were looking at.
3 inches in 48 hours on all sidewalks.
Previously, the sidewalk in front of your house had this standard
Immediately.
clear.
How many, do we ever get any complaints about anybody not doing their sidewalk in front of their house? I would assume
It's very
rare.
It's going to be a gray area, and if you get one guy on his bicycle, that's going to be
Yeah.
riding around after a snowstorm.
Yeah.
You're going to get calls anyway, so it's going to be a gray area, no matter what we do. So yeah, let's just.
Well, if you want gray areas when it's drifts,
Yeah, exactly.
was one area dry and one area got 6 feet, what are you going to do no matter how you write it? So just remember, it's pure Michigan.
Yeah.
It's pure Troy. Their vagueness is part of the process of this thing. It's just how can we
the law
box it in?
versus the legality of the law. It not only happens with them, it happens in police work and enforcement, building codes, all of that stuff, so.
I think it shows
You have
up,
to give discretion sometimes to the person that's enforcing the laws.
it shows up in the data with the number of enforcements. So, to re-summarize, it's change the code to all roads 3 inches, all sidewalks 3 inches, 48 hours, all sidewalks. Got it?
And that's where we're coming to, but turning back to DPW, they chose 4 inches for a reason. I don't know why. Maybe it's because their plows are very effective at 4 inches and 3 inches are not. So rather than sit here as a council and say, let's move it from 4 to 3 automatically, well, I think we need to let them come back with some advice. There may be a pretty good reason why it's 4 inches.
I think my suggestion was, could they bring back some data, see what the cost is to reduce down to 3, and at the same time, I think it was cost.
Could have been.
I think it was cost.
I can give you just a little bit of history on prior, I want to say 22, 23 years ago, I believe, based on speaking to the past DPW directors, that the snow removal was actually at 6 inches at one point in time.
And that's for residential roads.
And it was for
not major
residential
roads.
subdivision roads. And it was determined that they were building smaller, lighter cars and, different tire tread patterns and things, and there was all-weather tires put out there. People used to buy a set of summer tires and a set of winter tires, and that's the way it was. So what happened was that because of that difficulty of driving around, they reduced that from 6 to 4 inches. Now, when you're out driving in it every night that it snows, which I used to do and Kurt does now, what happens is that when you get, 3.5 to 3 3/4 to 4 inches, depending on how heavy the snow is, it does make a big difference between 3 and 4 inches.
That's what
There's a bigger difference between 4 and 6 inches. And so, it comes down to the types of that you drive, or if you're driving a pickup truck, even if it's not four-wheel drive, or if these vehicles are front-wheel drives, they get through the snow quite easily. Where we really start getting complaints is when it gets over 4 inches and there's drifting. And then we make calls on those areas of town, because, it's a large city. We don't get the same amount of snow all over town. There'll be times we'll take subdivisions and go and bump the curbs back because there was more snow in that subdivision than there was elsewhere, and there was also drifting that contributed. So, there's a lot of factors when we go into that, but that's how the history is on the depth of snow.
I had 3 neighbors that, it was, I think, 3 3/4 inches this year, and it wasn't plowed, and they had a tough time getting out of the sub. And if you put a little incline on my sub has a little bit of an incline getting out. I'm getting tired of pushing them out of the subdivision.
You can do something special for your subdivision.
Do something special.
Any other comments? I know some people in the audience wanted to say some things this evening, but the process that we have in these study sessions is that there is no public comment, but we are certainly willing to sit and talk at any time with any resident. Mr. Kishnick, the city manager, has an open door policy that anybody can call him and come to his office at any time. So there was something that was said tonight that you want some clarification on. Please feel free to contact one of us or City Manager Kishnick. We'd be happy to do that. And we look forward to getting back together and talking about this and other pure Troy issues. We are adjourned.